Welcome back to Ranks FC, where it's time for our main ranking. It is the international break, so we thought we'd go nation focused today. Sam, over to you.
Yes, first international break following the World Cup. And it's just ahead of the European qualifiers, so it's a bit of a clean slate for a lot of nations. Not everybody's back in competitive action. Obviously, you see a lot of the nations outside the UEFA zone are playing friendlies, but they're all going to be gearing up for their respective campaigns in their sort of more continental trophies. The Euros are going to be happening. England, we're back in it. We've got to play Italy this week. I feel like we just played them, and we just played them before that as well. It never really stops, but this is it. This is the time to re-energize for a lot of these nations. And as I was scrolling through the groups and scrolling through the different nations, I was looking at it and thinking, well, which nations might be in a position here to sort of turn their fortunes on their heads here and maybe qualify and punch above their weight for the first time in a while? What new faces might we see on the scene? And which new players, which young players might be able to power that transformation? So I started flicking through the squads, and I think I've picked out, well, at least 4, potentially 5, depending if you've been living under a rock or not. 5 young players who are going to basically burst onto the scene here and potentially power their nations into new heights. Almost all these players, have got just a handful of caps. So we are really talking about fresh faces on the scene. I could begin at 5. If you've got any more questions, Jack, or good to go?
Let's go. Let's do it.
All right. We'll begin at number 5, and it's Arda Güler of Turkey, who I am going to describe as the Mesut Ozil that Turkey never actually got. And I know that this was a bit of a bone of contention for some Turkish fans, because Mesut Ozil obviously identifies very strongly, very, very strongly indeed with Turkey, but always played his football for Germany. And it's been a long time coming, but I think they finally got a player, a left-footed, weaving, dribbling number 10 that they can be really, really proud of. And you know what? They genuinely are like quite a lot of comparisons between the two. They do move in the same way. They do manipulate the ball in the same way. And they also have that little extra pass in them in a direction that you couldn't possibly have foreseen, or that one extra touch that no other player would take that just changes the angle for the better. He's definitely got that gene to him. He has 1 cap for Turkey, just 1 cap. But this season, he started to work his way into the Fenerbahce first team. We've seen him on Thursday nights in Europa League and Europa Conference stuff. We've seen him play weekends, and Fener are in a title race. They're second in the league behind Gala, 6 points back, but 1 game in hand, and they're giving this guy real opportunities to have his say. And from a Turkish perspective as well, there's a couple of other developments that might clear the path for him, because maybe this time last year, I'll be looking at this and saying, well, Turkey have a very capable number 10 in Hakan Çalhanoğlu. But over the last 6 months, he has dropped really deep in Inter's formation, and he's become the player that actually covers Marcelo Brozovic as the deepest midfielder in a 3. So if you put him deep in midfield, where he's now very comfortable, alongside maybe Orkun Kökçe or maybe Salih Özcan from Dortmund, who has great energy.
This is a great midfield.
You've got to, all of a sudden it's like, well, hang on a minute. Not only is this quite well balanced and pretty competent, but it also has a vacancy in the number 10 role where Arda Güler can maybe step in. So let's see exactly how big the steps are initially. But I think over the course of this qualifying campaign, he's going to nail down a spot as the prime creator for Turkey, possibly playing with Çalhanoğlu and Kökçe or Özcan. And all of a sudden, it's like, wow, actually, Turkey, who crashed out so hard at Euro 2020 and then did not qualify for the last World Cup, could be back at it once again.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Kökçe's in the squad this time round. But
no, not this time around, but he has been in the last 6 months or so.
It looks like they're building a lovely little midfield core there. You can imagine them playing a 4-3-1-2 with Güler in the 10. A really, really nice little setup going on. But it does feel like a time of renewal for Turkey, because there were so many. The way that they played in the qualification period ahead of the last Euros was sensational. They were brilliant, like truly brilliant. And then they crashed and burned at the tournament. And it felt like they were just completely unable to recover from that in terms of qualification. And they've fallen off, a bit of a cliff in terms of where they were and then where they were again 2 years later. So this does feel like a real reset point for them. And there's a lot of talent in this squad, as you say, especially in this midfield, sure. But generally, I think you look at it and you go, okay, there's players here who make things happen and not just relying on the old guard quite as much anymore. And actually, when you look at all of it put together, do you believe that, there's a very good base for something to build on here for another World Cup round for Turkey?
Absolutely, mate. Absolutely. And one of the names I didn't mention there in the little cohort of midfielders, because he doesn't belong in midfield, but they also have Ferdi Kadioglu, who plays for Fenerbahce, who plays left back or right back for Fenerbahce, but was a midfielder beforehand. He gets up and down that flank like crazy. So I hadn't really considered like a 4-3-1-2, but when you did mention it, I could see him running up and down the flank and maintaining the width and pinging in the crosses. And you've got Güler in the 10. Like, it's pretty exciting. Like, obviously, as we all know, names on paper don't necessarily come together to make good football teams.
Yeah.
And we'll have to see how it all mixes in. The manager, Stefan Kuntz, is going to have to put it all together. Like, he's got a lot to answer for here. Well, no, Turkey do, and he has to kind of figure it all out. But we'll see. I think there's really good ingredients here for the first time in a while, and they're all appropriately aged. They're not like 35, 36 sort of thing like I have been in the past, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, who's in at number 4 then, mate?
Okay, number 4 is Evan Ferguson.
Yes.
Of the Republic of Ireland. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Jack, but in my estimation, the Republic of Ireland have not really had a genuine, proper striker since Robbie Keane retired from duty. Would that be about right?
Yeah, I'd say that's probably about fair. It hurts me to say it. I've loved quite a lot of these lads, but yeah, in terms of actual performances on pitches, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So he retired in 2016, and obviously the last couple of years he'd slowed down a little bit, and we're probably going back to 2013 since he had a proper year where he scored like more than 5 goals in a year for Ireland, and Ireland actually had like a real bagsman. So it's like, depending on how harsh you want to be, it's potentially been a decade since Ireland have had a striker they can really lean on and really be proud of. And in all of that time since, like, while there have been, wisps of a good team, they've just never been particularly threatening, have they? Like,
yeah, we just
work hard,
pieces, man.
Yeah, play a bit of good football here and there. Great energy, some good players as well. Like there's always 2 or 3 players on the pitch that are quite good. But if Plan A is Big Shane Duffy up from a corner, then obviously you're not a very threatening team. So in steps Evan Ferguson here, who does have the potential to be genuinely transformative. He is only 18 years of age, and he is still very early, kind of into his breakout mold season. There's 3 in the league. He'd have more if he hadn't got injured. He got 2 in the cup at the weekend. And he's not just a goal scorer, is he? He's a very good all-round player who Roberto De Zerbi is, trying to coach and mold into basically the next Harry Kane down at Brighton. And, he's going to step into this Ireland setup now. And for a long, long time, you're pinning your hopes on Troy Parrott. Please, Troy, please be the truth. And all of a sudden, Evan Ferguson, I mean, he's just ready, isn't he? Not only is he just like much more threatening, but he's like obviously better physical in the box as well. He's better at linking play and dropping in. He's just a more ready player to carry a line. And it has to be considered potentially transformative.
Yeah, I don't think there's any sort of doubt. The only doubt was sowed by the newspapers over in the UK, who decided that they were going to try and suggest that he might play for England. But once he's made that first competitive start against France on Tuesday, we're all good. We're all good.
I mean, that must be a relief for all of you when he does that.
Well, it's gonna be. It'll make a change, huh?
Like a celebration. You all just start cheering at kickoff.
The kickoff whistle goes. He kicks off, and everyone in Ireland.
The roar we're gonna get when that happens. I tell you,
gets taken off 2 minutes later. It's just done.
But I think
actually playing.
I think this is it, Sam. In that there's actually quite a lot of young talent here coming through. Obviously, the keeper core with Bazunu and Kelleher, even Mark Travers, who's obviously at Bournemouth, is good and young. It's a 21 to 24 kind of range. There's some good defenders coming through, led by Nathan Collins, who's at Wolves, but including a couple of others, Andrew Omobamidele at Norwich, etc. And Josh Cullen's sort of the eldest of this new generation of midfielders at 26. And then there's Jason Knight and Jason Malumbi and a couple of others in that kind of mold. it does mean that you're looking at it and going, okay, all right. And, Joe Hodge is someone, for example, he's not been called up this time around, but who's been played Premier League football for Wolves, who is Irish. And there feels like the bare bones of a really good squad with a little bit of extra on the elder side, the likes of a Cullen who'll be 29 at the next World Cup. You need that, right? You can't just have a load of 18 to 20-year-olds and throw them in at the deep end, unless you're apparently Feyenoord, who are just doing it anyway. But it's just generally, I think you need that kind of sense of experience. And it just feels like Ireland are going into a cycle with a generation. I hate the words golden generation, but a generation that feel like they have the potential to turn things around again. And Ferguson was the kind of last point of that. And there's lots of good young strikers coming through who aren't necessarily that mold, right? You've got the likes of an Adam Ida, who I really like, Michael Obafemi, Chidozie Ogbene, Parrott as well, you mentioned. There's a lot of players that you're like, okay, they're all pretty, sharp and know what they're doing, but they all feel a bit more like wide forwards. And so you're looking for this person to kind of hang through the middle and be like, right, we can make things happen. And Ferguson has emerged from nowhere as this kind of bright light to spearhead the movement. I'm on board. I don't think it's going to be enough for Ireland in this cycle. We're in a group with the Netherlands and France. And obviously only 2 teams qualify, 1 automatically, I believe, for the next Euros. So it's going to take a mighty effort for Ireland to be there at all. But I do think looking towards the next World Cup, and obviously we've seen the expansion announced this week, firmly by FIFA. I think this is a group of players who could end that. The last time Ireland were at World Cup was 2002. I was barely out of diapers. But it feels like one of those where the 2026 World Cup could be the first time we see Ireland at a World Cup for the best part of 25 years, which would be incredible.
Wow, worrying to know that you were in diapers age 9. But yeah.
What do you mean? I was in nappies until I was in nappies at 14, mate.
But yeah, I think as you say, like the type of striker that Evan Ferguson is really important. Someone that can get himself involved in the game, someone that doesn't necessarily need to be brought into the game. If Ireland had just produced, Ciro Immobile, like great, but like, do you have the players to activate him? Probably not. Doesn't matter. You've got Evan Ferguson, doesn't need that help, can take in the long ball. So that's a really important ingredient as to why he can be so transformative, because it doesn't necessarily matter that the other complementary pieces may not be on the pitch. But actually, that's part of the reason I put him at 4 and Güler at 5. Is as we go through the ranking, we're going to steadily talk about more impactful players, like players that do have an enhanced chance of changing things in the short term. And I'll move us to 3 for someone who has not been capped yet, but genuinely might transform this team. It's Romeo Lavia for Belgium, who has been called up by Domenico Tedesco in a squad which has seen like quite a few prominent figures now retired. Alderweireld has retired, Eden Hazard has retired, and Mignolet has gone too. De Bruyne is still there, Lukaku's still there. Like it's not the end of the world, but this team is really starting to look different. And Vertonghen now mid-30s, not the player he once was. Lots happening here. It almost feels weird to have Belgium in a list of like nations that need their sort of fortunes transformed, because they've been so good for so long. But that World Cup campaign was an absolute disaster, and we all saw it coming, which suggests that things have been problematic for a couple of years, and they reacted far too late for it in time for 2022. And now, obviously, they're trying to put the pieces in place. Remember, this is a team that Kevin De Bruyne called old and slow. So we are watching its next steps incredibly carefully. Lavia has been called up. He only turned 19 in January, but he is probably Southampton's 3rd or 2nd best player. And I think he's going to step into this team and make a real difference, because one of the things I noted from Belgium at the World Cup, they just can't keep that ball. They just can't get on the ball. Like, it was embarrassing for a team with that much talent on paper to be so inept in possession. And Lavia is absolutely exceptional in the lone 6 role, or as part of a kind of pairing, at taking the ball off the centre-backs and progressing it through the middle and hanging on to it as well. He's so press-resistant. He is absolutely brilliant. So whatever you can do to take the onus off De Bruyne having to drop in and take the ball and then move forward with it is fantastic. And I have a suspicion that Lavia will immediately become very, very important for Belgium, just in terms of like the general fluency of the team. And then as a result of that, once you kind of fix that, players like De Bruyne, players like Lukaku suddenly look a lot better. So this is a player I think can really step into a really important role.
Yeah. I agree. Dean?
I mean, look, he's obviously like got a big future ahead of him anyway. Like his club career, who knows where it could take him. I mean, even this summer, I think we're going to see Lavia linked with some massive clubs. Chelsea, obviously, have been on his tail for however long, and United being linked. Sure, Tottenham will be sniffing around, knowing that they could do with a Højbjerg replacement. I think I'm just going to say replacement at this stage. I can't see Højbjerg continuing in Tottenham's midfield for too much longer. But yeah, I think that there's going to be some big teams looking at him, and it's going to go hand in hand with his international career here and the progress that he makes on both fronts at the same time. Like he's going to be a star. He really is. Like the level of performances he can already produce is ridiculous, especially in a team that aren't functioning most of the time. Like that's the other thing to take into account. Like he's been able to stand out, and you can say, well, that's because the other 9 players, apart from him and Ward-Prowse, aren't producing. But it's like, well, it's not easy to do that, is it? It's really hard to function well in a team that doesn't function well.
They can't play without him, mate. That's the thing. He is the reason they function at all. Even with Ward-Prowse on the pitch, without Lavia, they can't string it together properly. Like Lavia had to go to the bench against Brentford last midweek, presumably because of workload, and they had to bring him on just before the 60-minute mark just to try and get something going. They can't play without him.
It's interesting, and so that kind of goes hand in hand then with the Belgium situation, whereby they need somebody that can do that. They need somebody to be the focal point of the team in the middle of the park. But also, I mean, obviously you two were doing a scouting podcast on here last week, and it must actually be really hard to scout a player like that who is, clearly a standout player at Southampton, but knowing that you're taking him to a team where he's not going to be the standout player, he's going to be a small part of a big engine that's already well ahead of where this current team is. That must actually be quite tricky to know how it falls. I mean, I guess it's the same with Belgium to some extent, because they've got players that have been playing on such a stage for so long, but they're obviously in a stage of evolution at the moment. Really interesting though. Like he's one of the players that is going to hold the biggest intrigue for me in these next couple of years.
Yeah, definitely. He's one of those that just feels like he's on the verge of superstardom, and it's very early in his career. And, to come into this Southampton side and be so important straight away, it is a massive, compliment to both him and his application and his work rate, as well as that natural talent. I think that he was just ready for it. And it's been a move, I think, that's been a success for everybody. So you look at it and think, well, where's the next step? And the next step feels like it's on the international stage. And it's going to be a real, again, I felt like I said this for Turkey, but this is massive for Belgium. And you look at how this is going to play out and how it could, how things can go south very quickly. And we know this, from our own national teams, obviously. You lose one game, the opening game of Euro qualification, it looks really mucky straight away, right? So they need this to happen, and they need it to happen fast. And so how they approach that first fixture is going to be really, really intriguing, I think.
Yep, and with a new manager as well, it's there's a lot has changed. So there's a lot that can go right, or a lot that can go wrong.
But yeah, also their first game is against Sweden away from home. Sweden aren't an international powerhouse by any stretch of the imagination, but they're a good side and they're a solid side, and it's the kind of game you really don't want on match day 1 when you're trying to rebirth everything. So it's going to be very intriguing to see how they deal with it.
Absolutely. Right. I'm going to move us on to number 2. And I'm going to talk about Oscar Gloukh of Israel. I think what we're talking about here is the new face of football in Israel. Like the level of hype and popularity that he has accrued at age 18 is absolutely crazy.
Mate, it's almost like you haven't heard of Mana Solomonania, which is currently sweeping the country.
Interesting.
I'm going to eat these words, mate. I'm going to eat these words.
It's interesting. I wrote down 22 seconds for amount of time it would take Jack to mention Mana Solomon, and you beat it by an easy 12. But no, it's Oscar Gloukh. He's the one, and for good reason. Like incredible footballer, really extremely good, creative number 10 player and goal scorer. So Arda Güler is similar kind of player there in that sense. But Gloukh has already got like this, I don't know, this like power behind him from his nation, because he was pivotal in the Euro under-19s last season or last summer, where Israel got to the final. Like Israel getting to the final of an unders competition is absolutely incredible. And on the way, he scored 4 and he assisted 2, and he scored in the final. And they lost to England in extra time. But Israel
getting the final.
Yeah, he scored in the final. Scored the first goal in the final. But we beat them. But he got a silver medal. Like he led that team to the final, and they're so proud of him. And obviously, a lot of hype then going back into Israeli football. Didn't last there long. He's gone on to make his senior debut. He scored his first goal against Cyprus. He's moved to RB Salzburg, where he now starts, and he's already bagged his first assist. Like, this guy is on like a rocket trajectory, and he's going to be incorporated as a key part of this team 100%. And he's really, really good. So fair enough. Now, in placing him at number 2 here, I'm projecting a big impact, short term and medium term. I'm also looking at Israel and what they have or have not achieved in international football, and asking, can he be the pivotal factor here? And the reality is, Israel have qualified for 1 World Cup. It was in 1970, and that's it, right? They're not exactly regular customers on this stage, and they're in a group with Switzerland, sure, but also Kosovo, Belarus, Andorra, and Romania. And it's not just Gloukh. There's a guy at Fulham you may have heard of called Manor Solomon. And then there's Liel Abada at Celtic. There's Sean Weissman at Granada. They've got a decent little team getting put together here. Like, it's not bad. And I'm just looking at that collection of teams and I'm thinking, could they? Genuinely, could they? With the power of Oscar Gloukh kind of pulling the strings there. It's possible.
Yeah, I think so. That's a group you'd like to be in. If Ireland were in that group, I'd be over the moon. Like, let's put it that way, right? That's a group that you go, okay, there are some good sides. Kosovo have rocketed up since they were allowed on the international scene a couple of years back. They've become a very good side, so they deserve credit. Switzerland, they will win that group. It's just what they do. They're not going to be very exciting. They're not going to be fun to watch, but they will be at the Euros. But could Israel come second in that group? Yeah, I think they could. I think that looks like a two-way tussle between them and Kosovo, and that's no disrespect to the other nations there. Romania, I'm sure, will want to have their say, but it doesn't feel like the Romanian teams of old. They've got a few players coming through who people are excited about, but just generally, I think that it looks like a group that Israel will feel that they can look at and go, why not? Maybe we can get to get second and qualify in terms of the qualifiers.
100%, yeah. Looked at it and just thought that is wide open for them. And in years gone past, they've had one or two good players. Like, Israel have had good players. Yossi Benayoun has been fantastic, obviously, but I think they've got 3 or 4 here, and they've got a stardust of this new gold boy who is genuinely like exceptional. And I'm just starting to dream on their behalf. I wonder how excited they are if I'm this excited.
Yeah, I imagine they are very, very excited. Okie dokie. Who's then at number 1?
Okay. So all the players that we've talked about so far have got a handful of caps, if any at all. I think the max is 2. Lavia has none. But we're going to change tact a little bit here. And he does feel like a bit of a separate case. But he is the definition of a young star who can transform his nation's fortunes. It is Erling Haaland of Norway.
Who's not playing in these qualifiers.
He's unfortunately injured. Not a great start for me here, but I still wanted to talk about this because it's something that always perplexes me whenever I remember it. But Norway actually haven't qualified for a tournament for some time, and this is one of those things where, like, when you're a kid, when you're like, age 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever it is, still in diapers if you're Jack's case, and you're taking in the teams in a World Cup setting, or you're looking at your sticker book and you're seeing these teams, you also basically assume that these teams are like, okay, so these teams qualify for every World Cup. Like, this is who's at the World Cup. And then obviously, as you get older, you realise that some of them are never seen again. And it's been the case for a team like Scotland, and it's been the case for a team like Norway, who had a golden patch from 1994 to 2000, qualified 2 World Cups and the Euros, and since then, absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. Into the 23rd year since Norway have done anything at all, which is felt really strange because they've obviously had some really good players. But now they have Erling Haaland, and he's quite good. And while his development did come a little late for the last cycle, but look at him now, and look at how Norway are primed in this cycle. Also consider his supporting cast. It's not just Erling Haaland, is it? It's Martin Ødegaard and like Morten Thorsby and Sander Berge and Benfica's Fredrik Aursnes, Ola Solbakken at Roma. Like,
I really like Hugh Vetlesen at Bordeaux as well, who took over from Solbakken when Solbakken went off to Roma and has done really, really nicely there. He's about 23, I think. He's a player. So I'm not sure if he's in the squad or not, but he's a very good player. Marcus Pedersen at Feyenoord, Julian Ryerson at Dortmund, yeah.
Ryerson. Ostergaard at Napoli as well. Like, doesn't play that much, but he's part of a very good team.
It always stuns me when I find out that Leo Ostergaard is 23. But I'm like, that guy feels like he's been around forever. He was at Stoke and then he was at Brighton and all sorts of different things. But yeah, he's a good player. And I think that they are, they're in good shape. The only place they're not in good shape is in goal.
Yes, then let's not talk about that. But never mind. But the rest of it is all good. And obviously having, one of the world's best strikers is tremendous help. And for those of you that don't necessarily keep up with his international football records, Erling Haaland's goal rate is basically the same as it is at club level, 21 goals in 23 games for Norway. And he's actually only 12 goals off the all-time record Norwegian national goal scorer.
Is it Tore André Flo?
No, it was set back in 1937.
Oh.
He's barely got started. He's barely got started, and you know what? It just wouldn't surprise you if in 2 years' time that goal record has crumbled. So, obviously, a bit of a spanner in the works when he has to withdraw from these early games. I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing that he's missing for the Spain game. Like, do you paint it as, well, they'd have lost it anyway? Or do you paint it as, that's a huge opportunity missed? Could Erling Haaland have been the difference against a Spain side who's figuring themselves out under a new manager? I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. The second for me. I think that we have no idea what Spain are going to look like. It's really exciting, and I'm really excited to see them play and really intrigued about how they're going to set up. But absolutely missed opportunity for Norway. Yeah. I mean, they've got Alexander Sørloth, who's in absolutely dreadful form for Real Sociedad, so that'll be fine.
that would be fine. But look, you say it's not just like we can use Haaland as a proxy to talk about Norway, to talk about the fact that they've got a good generation coming through. They've got Arsenal's captain feeding the bullets for when Erling is finally back, and you presume that he'll be a part of the June games. And I think Norway are finally going to reach a tournament, for the first time in over 2 decades. It's been a long time coming, but this is probably the chance.
Yeah, there's a couple of players who weren't called up for this who you'd imagine are going to be part of the kind of setup as well for the next couple of years. Christopher Ajer is obviously at Brentford. He's 24 or so, and he I think will be a big part of this defense going forward. At the moment, he's just coming back from an injury, so obviously they've decided not to call him up this time. But there's a fair bit. Jens Petter Horger, who obviously hasn't gone to plan from where he was 2 years ago, feels like he's regressed a little bit. He's now again in Belgium. And you'd imagine that he's just trying to rebuild himself there a little bit. But there's a good crop of players here with a really exciting kind of element of how it's going to play out. And I think Norwegian fans could be very, very excited about this generation.
Yeah, it's a good crop of players, spearheaded by an elite striker and led by... and led by, one of the best creative midfielders in the world. Like, the ingredients are most certainly there. It stuns me really when I look back at when I was looking at Haaland's goals and the national record for Norway. I was looking at the players that they've had represent them, and you mentioned Tore André Flo there. They've had Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, who was obviously part of the last team that got anywhere for Norway. They've
Big John Carew.
And they had John Carew, and their record caps holder is John Arne Riise. Like, they've had genuinely good players, but don't think they've had this many good players at the same time, and they've never had 2 elite or borderline elite players playing for them at the same time, I don't think. So it does feel very different this time around.
And John Arne Riese's brother, Bjorn Helge Riise, Also,
Oh,
very
yeah.
good
Did he play for
footballer
Fulham?
himself. Both of
Yeah.
them played for Fulham.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty mad though. But it will be good to see how this takes off because it seems like it can't fail. If you can just make those, even the 3 of those players that you mentioned, like function well, like the best, you're in. Like
You should be.
Odegaard and Holland alone should be like get you to this next like tournament. Like the doors are opening for all over the place now. I know that, and so like everyone suddenly feels like they've got more hope and chance of reaching these tournaments. But you've got Erling Haaland, like it's done. Surely.
And it's not like he can't do it for Norway. It's not like it's like, oh, he's good. 21 and 23, mate. Like, it's got to be. It's got to be.